We are supporting lives and charter recovery housing. In supporting lives, we help anyone who's homeless. We put a roof over their head and then support them to get back to some form of normal living. For some of our residents, that's moving into charter recovery housing, where we support them to develop their recovery capital to achieve their goals in terms of abstinence from drug or alcohol use, and to achieve that life beyond their wildest dreams that they don't believe that they have the ability of doing before they come into supporting lives or charter. We support in supporting lives people who have physical health problems, mental health problems, trauma, anything that causes somebody to have a disadvantage to your average person. Um, they may just be homeless. So I'm an addict in recovery. So I'm really passionate about recovery, and addiction and homelessness comes hand in hand. We often need to manage both of them at the same time in order to stop that cycle of addiction and that cycle of homelessness. You know, if you're homeless on the streets, then what else are you going to do other than drink and use to change the way that that feels, to make that more comfortable? So it really does come hand in hand. If you're homeless, then it's really difficult to manage that addiction. And I am incredibly passionate about um stopping that cycle and doing something really different. So we do support our residents when they move on and move into their own independent accommodation. From charter, they're able to continue to engage in the groups for another 6 to 8 weeks after they've left, so that they still have that connection and continue to build on that recovery capital and get used to living outside of recovery housing. And then within supporting lives, when they move on, they're still able to pick up the phone. They've got our contact numbers, the office number, our work mobiles, and they're still able to pick up the phone. And even if they've moved on into different accommodation, in a different supported accommodation service or anything like that, we still are there at the other end of the phone, that they can ring us up, and we'll always take their call, because it might just be that they want to tell us about something that they've done, that they're really proud of, or it might be that they actually need our help. And sometimes it's because they really need to come back, and we never ever turn anyone away. We've had residents who've moved on from charter, and I had a resident who moved on from charter about a year ago, and it was a really successful move on, and he moved back in with his family, and it was brilliant. It was lovely. Um, and just before Christmas, he'd had a slip, um, and he'd taken a few steps backwards, and he rang us and he said, "I really need your help. I I've messed up and I really need your help." So we brought him in and we did an assessment and we moved some people around and we found him a bed. And we got him back into charter recovery housing as quick as we possibly could, because he's asked for help, and that's what we do. So we stay in contact with them for as long as they need to, realistically, within them professional boundaries. They've got our office numbers, they've got our work mobile numbers, and we'll always take that phone call. We've got one resident who unfortunately was evicted, but he's in touch with her every couple of days. Every couple of days, it's a quick phone call just to let us know how he's doing or where he is, to tell us about his success stories. And it was just last week, he said, we kind of spoke amongst ourselves and we haven't heard from him. Is he all right? So we've chased it up. We've been able to make sure that he is safe, because he's currently homeless. Um, and we've made sure that he is actually okay. So even in situations that aren't quite as positive, they still know that we are here. And a lot of them will still contact us. It's what we do. And that's the same for when people move on. Once they've moved on, just because they've been a success story, that doesn't mean that they're gone. That doesn't mean that we're closed off. They're still one of our residents, and they always will be one of our residents. So even if they've been evicted, they're still one of our residents. That we still have that professional but caring relationship with them. And it's amazing for me to be able to work in an organization in a setting where we can do that. So we purchase the properties and own the properties that we then deliver the services in. And when I go to look at a property to see whether it's suitable, I'm considering whether that property is good enough. I would ask myself, would I live there? That's our motto. Would I live there? If I wouldn't live there, then that's not good enough for our residents either. You know, the quality of housing that we offer is just as important as the quality of support that we offer. Just because somebody's been homeless doesn't mean that they should just have a roof over their head. They should have a home. They should have a nice place to live where they feel safe, where there's, not just a bit of heating and hot running water, but somewhere that feels cozy, somewhere that they can sit and put their feet up and watch the telly and get that feeling that we all get when we get home from work and we put the telly on and we just go, oh, because it's somewhere nice and it's nicely decorated and it's safe and we know that we're secure and it's okay. And our residents should have that as well. They should have that same quality of life in terms of their accommodation that we all have. They're no different to us. So it's really important to me when I go into the properties and I look at them and when I, say, okay, this one needs a bit of work on that or this one needs a bit of work on the other, that I'm considering that that property should be of a decent standard and should be of the standard that I would want it to be at if I lived there. My favorite part of the job would definitely be seeing people achieve. Achievement is different depending on what stage we're talking about. Achievement in recovery and charter housing is somebody coming in or somebody coming to tell me, I've got my 90 days and the 90 days clean. It might be, I'm finally allowed to see my kids. I've got contact with my kids. It might be seeing somebody being picked up by their mum or their dad who they haven't had contact with for ages. Um, the best things about my job are getting people in off the streets. When you tell them they've got a bed, and I had a lady the other day, she'd been homeless, she'd been rough sleeping for a number of weeks. I got her in for an assessment and I said, you can have a bed. I've got a bed for you, we can move you in there tonight. And this was 4 o'clock. We finished at 4:30. But I said, we'll get you in there tonight. And she burst into tears. And she cried because she had somewhere safe to stay that night. She wasn't on the street. She wasn't cold. She didn't have to think about where she could stay safe. They're emotional, but they're the best parts of my job because I've made a difference that day. And that's all I ever want to do is make a difference. The worst parts of my job are the days I have to evict people. That's not why I do this job. I very much do this job because I want to stop that cycle of homelessness. But we have to have rules because if we don't have rules, then there aren't boundaries and risks escalate. And if we have gone through everything that we can possibly do in order to prevent somebody from being evicted, so we do behaviour plans, we do behaviour contracts, we do psychosocial interventions, we come up with plans, partnership working with other organisations, we work with the council. And if we've gone through absolutely everything, or there's an incident where somebody's aggressive, then I'm left with no other option but to evict. And no matter what the reasons for that eviction are, I always hate it. It's absolutely the worst part of my job because it feels like a failure. Because that's not what we're here for. That's not what I want to do. That's not why I do this job. I do this job for the opposite reason. So on them days, I hate my job because that's not what I'm here for. And I have to remember that we make such a difference to so many people that on them occasions where it hasn't worked, that's okay. The other days that I absolutely will say are the worst days are the days where we find somebody who's overdosed or we find somebody dead and they are They're not just the hardest days of your job, they're the hardest days of your life. They're massively impactful. I'm grateful it doesn't happen very often. I'm incredibly grateful it doesn't happen very often. And we are able to put in as many processes that we do in order to try and prevent that, and as much support that we do in order to prevent that. And I think that we do that well, but we're never going to succeed every time. There's always going to be somebody where we do find them, unfortunately, not with us anymore. And that is the hardest. Not the hardest days of your job, but the hardest days of your life. By no means are we strong. It breaks us. It absolutely breaks us. We had a lady November, and it's still really raw for us, for Lee as well. We worked with her all year. She was the first person we brought into here, and we spent more time with her than we did our own kids, especially in this last year. We've worked 60, 70-hour weeks, the pair of us, like we've had an entire new staff team. We've battled with the fact that we've had no staff all year, and it's just been the two of us for most of it. And it's been incredibly hard, but it meant we were with our residents more than we were with our own kids. So when Lee walked in and found Anne-Marie and we had to go through that, it was awful, absolutely awful. But what I will say is we gave her a quality of life in her last year. If she wasn't here, she'd have been homeless on the streets because that's where she was before she came to us. And we supported her to develop a relationship with her daughter, physically taking her, speaking to her daughter. Like, if it wasn't for us, she wouldn't have had that relationship with her daughter. And we supported her to actually have a relationship with her daughter in her last year. Her daughter massively thanks us for everything that we did for her. But yeah, incredibly hard and incredibly raw still, even though it is now January and that was November. We go above and beyond in this organisation in a lot of different ways. First and foremost, so many of our staff have lived experience, which makes them passionate, compassionate, empathetic in ways that can't be taught in by a book, can't be taught in college. It's something that is about who you are as a person. We're only paid to deliver 3 hours of support a week. Not one of our residents in supporting lives gets just 3 hours of support a week. We don't sit there and say to them, your 3 hours is done. We haven't got time for this. We say, what can we help you with? What do you need? Because we're here. And that's what we do. We will take people to appointments. It doesn't matter whether that appointment's going to take an hour and a half. If they need us there and they need us to hold their hand, then that's exactly what we'll do. We'll listen. We'll do 4, 5, 6 checks a day just to make sure that they're okay. We're at the other end of a phone for any of the residents that don't live in our main buildings. Our charter organisation will go and support them to attend their first meeting, something that's really scary. We'll go and pick them up and we'll take them and we'll be there sat next to them in that big room that's scary full of people that they don't know, and we'll make sure that they don't feel alone. We'll answer all the scary questions. We'll support them to get in contact with their families or children's services or the doctors if they need help. We'll support them to engage with the drug and alcohol services. In Charter, we deliver the groups in-house. We deliver our own groups in-house so that our residents don't need to think about, when they're in them early days of abstinence, they don't need to think about, I've got to go here, I've got to go there, I've got to be there at this time, I've got to be there at that time. Who's going to be there? What's it going to look like? Because they're surrounded by their own peers. It's their own people that live in their own house with them. They know them people. They've built up them relationships already. They're building them relationships every day. And they know the staff because they've got consistency. It's the same staff every time. So they know who's going to go. They know what they're going to be looking at. And they know that that support is there in-house for the whole time. So we'll deal with the recovery side of it in charter, but we also deal with everything else that they might need. Su support with their physical health, mental health, whatever it might be, taking them to their appointments. It does not matter what we are paid to deliver. It matters what they need. We also go above and beyond in the quality of our houses. Would I live there? That's really important because there are a lot of accommodations out there that, there's no consideration put into where recovery houses are based. For me, if we're buying a recovery house, I'm looking at what street that's in. Is there a smell of cannabis as you walk down the street? Because if there is, that's probably not the best place to put a recovery house, you know? Is there a place in that house that's light and airy that we can do a group that's going to feel like a psychologically informed environment? Are the rooms big enough? Are the windows in the rooms big enough that there gets enough light in there that they can feel like it's somewhere they want to be? It's not dark, it's not dingy, it's not awful. It's light, it's airy, it's uplifting, because all of them things impact your mental health and your mental well-being on a daily basis. So for us, we go above and beyond because it's not just about what we're paid for. It's about what the person needs. What do our residents need? And also, where should they be living? What accommodation should they be living in? Is that the standard that they deserve? And they all deserve just as much a higher standard as what we do. It's easy to say that the answer to that is to end homelessness. But for me, it's to stop that cycle of homelessness because they're different. We can't end homelessness alone, independently. But what we can try to do is to end the cycle of homelessness where somebody comes in and they get evicted because of their behaviour, because they don't fit within the service, and then they come back and then the same thing happens, or they go to a different service or a different service, because we see it all the time. A lot of our residents, just not necessarily our residents, but a lot of these residents, a lot of homeless people jump from service to service to service, and in between they're homeless or they're rough sleeping, and they don't really move on to independent accommodation. They don't reach that potential. They don't get back to that normal living, what we would call normal living, with, a job and their family, and or maybe education or training, but living in their own home. So for me, it's not actually to end homelessness. It's to end that cycle. It's to end the cycle for the individual, because that is something that I can do something about. I can't end it for everybody, but for every resident that comes in here, my goal for them is for them not to be evicted and end up on the streets or in another accommodation. It's to support them to change that behaviour, to support them to consider what their goals are, and to meet their needs so that they can then actually move on independently and reach their potential, build their relationships with family, go back to college, um, you know, think about volunteering, possibly a job, um, you know, get their mental health managed by their GP, or their physical health, go to them appointments. All of that stuff is what actually breaks the cycle of homelessness for each individual. And that is what I want to do. I want to end that cycle of homelessness, that revolving door, and just help people to move forward instead of going around in circles. There are so many other organisations out there that do recovery housing, and the moment somebody relapses, that person's evicted because they no longer fit within that service because they're drinking or using. We don't do that here. Like, because of the way that support and lives and charter are set up, we don't have to do that here. We work with somebody within charter, and we'll work with them to pick apart that relapse and figure out what's went wrong, what they can do differently, what happened, what triggered it. And if that happens again and again, and then they kind of go through that, then we sit there and think, okay, maybe this isn't right for you right now. We don't have to just evict them to the streets. We have the ability of bringing them into other parts of the service, bringing them back to our tier 1 or our tier 2 and supporting lives. So we don't have to evict. We do genuinely end that cycle, which other services don't necessarily do. I don't know another service that has that ability of doing that, especially not in this area. And we have that ability. We actually can stop that cycle at that point and just bring them back here and then get them ready and support them and do all the things that we need to do around them to support them with, relapse prevention and psychosocial interventions and one-to-ones and key working sessions to move them forward and back into charter. So we don't have to continue that cycle. We don't have to play a part and be in that cycle. We have the ability of stopping that cycle even at that point, which is truly a gift. Really is a gift and not something I would ever give up. But I've always said, you find a job that's worth doing, you'll never work a day in your life. And I absolutely love my job and I would never do anything other. I jump from job to job, right? I've always done it. I've never been in a job for more than 9 months without getting bored and thinking, like, I've learned everything I need to do. That's it, I'm off. And literally every 9 months, I'm looking for a new job. Over 2 years I've been here and it's never crossed my mind.
Right.
Always something. There's always something to learn. There's always something more to be doing. I'll never ever know everything. Never ever know everything in this job. And I'll never achieve what I want to achieve because it's not physically possible in my lifetime. Do you know what I mean? But what I can do is support this organization and build this organization to a point where, in another 3 lifetimes' time, that might be possible. You never know. But I'll make a difference today.